Well, hey everybody. Welcome back to Two Guys, a Girl in F1, except the girl is not here tonight. Instead, you're stuck with me, and we thought it would be fun. Sabrina and I, thought it would be fun if I did just a little bit of an introduction to the Red Bull Ring prior to the Austrian Grand Prix, which is coming up this weekend. And so I thought, you know what? That's a really interesting track. It's had a very interesting history, had a little bit of a tragic history, actually. And so I said, yeah, let's go ahead and just share a little bit of the history of the track, a little bit of the details on it, and maybe then as you watch the Grand Prix, you'll find it, maybe a little bit more helpful and make the race a little bit more interesting and meaningful to you. So we're going to give this a try a few times, and hey, hope you enjoy it. The Red Bull Ring actually was a permanent circuit that was built back in 1969 to replace a track that was an airfield circuit called Zeltweg. And Zeltweg hosted one F1 race in the mid-1960s, but the track, being an airfield and all that, it was very, very bumpy. Nobody wanted to race there. And so the people of Austria got together and they built what was then known as the Österreichring. And I'm sure I slaughtered that name, but it was completed in 1969. And it actually hosted the second Austrian Grand Prix in 1970, and they did it for about 18 years. It was quite the track. It was super high speed, lots of uphill and downhill, not terribly safe. And in fact, in 1975, Mark Donohue, who is an American, many of you who don't know who he was, but he was the guy that was really Penske's first big-time successful driver, and together they created what was known as the unfair advantage. Donohue was very much an engineer, very talented racing driver, but he won a lot of races with, basically his slide rule and his brain in addition to his talent. A really interesting guy. And so when Roger Penske decided to get into Formula One, he originally went in with a McLaren Formula One car. Believe it or not, back in those days, a guy could go out who was wealthy enough, could buy a Formula One car from a constructor and enter it as a privateer. And that's what Penske did. Donohue drove that McLaren for a few races, and then Penske, being Penske, figured, well, I can do a better job than McLaren. And so he built a Formula One car that was called the Penske. Anyway, the car was coming right, but unfortunately there was an accident when Donohue was driving the car in practice for the Austrian Grand Prix in 1975. And it was a weird deal. He got hit in the head by a fence pole, one of the safety fence, the catch fences. And, but he said, I've got a bit of a headache, but I'm okay. Walked away from it. And then not too long after that, he started having some really bad effects, went to the hospital and later died. So it was really a sad deal. And he was an Indy 500 winner, multiple Can-Am sports car champion, won the Trans Am Series. The guy was an incredibly versatile racing driver. So it was a hell of a loss for the sport. And I know that it really had an impact on Roger Penske for really even up to now. So anyway, that all being said, again, the last race that was hosted at the track at that stage with the original configuration was 1987. And after that, due to the safety concerns of the track, it was removed from the Formula One calendar. And later on, the A1 Telecommunications Company, which is an Austrian company, stepped in, purchased the track, and basically they rebuilt the track. They shortened it. They took out a lot of the really, really fast corners that were such a concern, and they renamed it the A1 Ring. And so with all those changes, they then began hosting Formula One again from 1997 to 2003. So they had about a 6-year run. And then in 2004, the founder of Red Bull, Dietrich, purchased the Red Bull Ring, purchased the A1 ring and renamed it the Red Bull Ring. And really, there was no activity, strangely enough, around the circuit for several years. But then in about 2008, Red Bull started investing heavily in the track and brought it up to modern Formula One standards. And they reopened in 2011 as a proper racing circuit, and then hosted Formula One again beginning in 2014, and it's been there ever since. So there was about a 10-year hiatus from the time that the track was purchased by Red Bull to the time that it started hosting F1 races again. And it's a really interesting track. It's about 2.7 miles long, so it's a relatively short track, 4.3 kilometers. Typically run 71 laps, makes up a race distance, which would be about 191 miles. The lap record during a race was set by Carlos Sainz, believe it or not, in 2020. He did a 105.6. And that same year, 2020, Valtteri Bottas set the fastest lap in qualifying at a 102.9. So it's fair to say that, the difference between a race lap record and the fastest qualifying lap is about 3 seconds. But again, that 102.9 has stood the test of time now for 5 years. Now let's see if they'll break it this weekend. The top speed that the cars are achieving is around 203, 204 miles an hour. And what's interesting is that the track was removed from the circuit because it was so fast. But the truth of the matter is they spend about 80% of the time per lap at full throttle. And there's one section that's about 900 yards long, so not quite a quarter of a mile. I think a quarter of a mile is like 1320, so it's 1,320 yards. And so the longest straightaway then is about 900 yards. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a comparison. But there's a lot of very fast corners, so that just builds the speed when you get 900 yards of just flat out straightaway. The downforce levels kind of depends on the car, but it's going to be somewhere between a low to a medium downforce. It's got 32 changes per lap on average, and it uses about 1.5 kilograms of fuel every lap, and that then translates, each lap becomes about 0.05 of a second quicker as fuel loads get burned off. The other thing that I think is interesting is not only are you talking about losing 1.5 kilograms per lap in weight, the other thing to bring into consideration is the fact that the time that is lost on pit lane for a pit stop is just over 16 seconds. So if somebody has a lead of 16 seconds, let's say you're leading the race and you're leading the field by 17 seconds, you ought to be able to make a pit stop and come back out on track still in the lead. So that's something to keep in mind. 16 seconds seems to be the magic number around there as you plan your strategy. There's 3 DRS zones on this track, so that should provide for some overtaking. So we'll see. As far as who do I think is going to win, well, I don't know what the deal is about this track, but it really seems to suit the McLarens. Even before ground effect came out, the McLarens went well there. They somehow know what it takes to be quick at the Red Bull Ring. And so I think one of the two McLarens have to be the favorites, but this is Max Verstappen's second home race, or his other home race, if you will. He gets a ton of fans coming in from Holland, to cheer for him. So he certainly has that going for him. Plus, of course, it's the home race for Red Bull Racing, right? So there's a little bit of a home field advantage there. So you certainly don't want to count him out. And I think, again, just based on the form book for this year, If the weather were to be a little bit on the cool side, who knows? Maybe George Russell in that Mercedes might go and pull some magic out again. So we'll see. Ought to be a very, very interesting weekend. I hope you like this little summary, this little preview of the race. Again, it's a beautiful track, fast, and it's located in an absolutely gorgeous part of the world. Definitely one that you want to watch, and really, I think it would be awesome to go visit this place. So anyway, enjoy the race, and we'll certainly have our race notes sometime shortly after that race for you to enjoy.